show going, and really appreciate people logging on here on a Monday because normally when we do our live streams, we're on Tuesdays. So sorry about the scheduling change. It wasn't so intentional. It was just the calendaring was a little bit difficult this week. It's graduation week for our family, and I was dealing with some of that with my kids and also my nephew and just a number of people this week. And so the way that schedule was working out, Monday was the only day I could do the live stream this week. So hopefully it'll give you an opportunity if there's fewer people logging on since we're doing this on an unscheduled or a not typically scheduled night. Maybe you'll be able to have more questions answered than you would otherwise. The last couple times I've had a hard time keeping up with all the questions when people have been sending them to me. So just real quick, kind of an overview again. Please say @WeTheGoverned. It'll just make it easier for me to pick up the questions, and then I'll have them down on the screen like you see down here below, and I will try to respond to them. And that way, it'll make it a little bit easier for you to see what question I'm answering, and if I've gone entirely off the radar, off the reservation, just gone into a totally different topic, but it nevertheless, I'll show you the question. Like this one will be the first one up, and you'll be able to hear me try to answer those questions as they come up. The one thing I wanted to thank was everybody who attended the Saturday event up in Skagit County, the Lincoln Day dinner that was up there. I was the MC at that event, which really was more about just kind of keeping the trains running on time, trying to process. There were a lot of candidates, and for the most part, most of the candidates there did a pretty good job sticking to their time limit, and we rotated through a lot of different candidates, and a lot of people had a chance to speak. There were about 350-ish so people that bought the tickets ahead of time, and I think all told, they were probably closer to about 400 people there at the event. Great venue that they have at the Skagit County Republicans up there at the Skagit County Airport inside that hangar. That's just a great event for that type of venue. Lots of seating, lots of parking, easy to get to, and just that's becoming one of the bigger Lincoln Day dinners around the state, at least on the west side. So it was very fun to be there. I really enjoyed the opportunity, not just to MC there, but also to talk to everybody afterwards. I had a little table set up, and so it was good to have a chance to actually chat with some people. One of the things that I had mentioned there at the event was, if you want me to come and help train your activist group or just do a presentation, I have a number of different presentations I can do, and I'd be happy to come and speak to your group as well. Just organize a venue, organize a time and a date, and be willing to kind of market it so that people can go there, and I'll reference it on my live stream and also share it out there. But if you want to have me come and speak, as long as I can fit it in the calendar and fit it in the schedule, it's usually best if it's a few months in advance. I'm happy to do that. Sometimes people will do fundraisers for me as well, and I'm happy to come and speak. And sometimes those are smaller venues, maybe at homes or at businesses. I've done those in the past as well. So if you're interested in doing that, just reach out to me. My email is Glen, Glen, @WeTheGovern.com. Usually it's pretty easy to get a hold of me that way. So send me an email if you got some dates or events that you'd be interested in. So either training or just presentations, or even if you wanted to host a fundraiser for me, that'd be great. As much as I try to keep everything as inexpensive as possible, there's still real costs that are involved in doing this. And this is all I do for a living. And I won't say it's that much of a living, but it's something, it's a passion, of course, of mine. And so getting out there and being involved in the process and try to make a difference and an impact in Washington State, it ends up taking quite a bit of time. And hopefully it's helpful for people, even if you don't live in Washington. If you are watching from other states, I do go out and do some training for some activists in other states as well. But that usually involves you paying and covering my costs to get there, and there's a little bit more involved in doing that. But I'm happy to schedule that as well if you want me to come out and help you as well. So let's get to the first question that somebody had posted up here, and it's down below here. It says, question, is it illegal if I take down the Ferguson sign in my neighborhood? It's in the city 5-foot zone, not in the yard. And what you mean when you're asking that question, Janice, is you're basically saying that it's in the county easement usually, or city easement if you're in a city. The answer is it is illegal. Don't take it down. Please don't do that. And the sign wars that inevitably happen this time of year, I know the left steals signs all the time. They have whole groups come out. I mean, they're pathological about it. I do know that's true. What I would do is put up your own signs in that same place and put an air tag on it and see if somebody else steals it and where they bring it to. Sometimes they actually put it in their cars. Sometimes they'll bring it to their houses. It is, usually in most jurisdictions, it's a misdemeanor. And it can be criminally charged if you steal signs. So a couple years ago, we caught it was a Grays Harbor Democrat chair who was stealing signs, opponent signs, and they caught him on a game camera stealing the signs. And weirdly enough, he was actually wearing a suit and he was doing it in between his meetings. So he would have like a public meeting, as a county commissioner. He was also an elected county commissioner at the time. He got unelected that cycle, but he was taking time off between meetings and stealing campaign signs, and he did get charged for that in Thurston County. I remember he had some kind of a fine, because since he was a county commissioner, they couldn't do it within the county there. They had to do it in a nearby county. Also recently, if you've been paying attention to some of the videos that we did last year, the North Kitsap School superintendent was caught stealing signs, and the police were involved in that investigation and charging her as well. And she did some community service, and she was no longer the superintendent. So there are good things that come out of exposing the truth about it. Don't be that person that gets caught on the camera yourself stealing signs. Just don't do it. But you can always put up, especially in the easement, you can put up your own signs, and that jumps me down actually to the next question that Janice, you also had, since you were the first person asking questions here. Can you put up an anti-communist sign anywhere you want? And the answer is yes, you definitely can. And so when you go to do that, you can put that up right next to Bob Ferguson. That'll be an anti-Bob Ferguson campaign sign, I believe, of some kind. Clearly protected under free speech. There's multiple Supreme Court cases on this. They cannot discriminate against your signs versus the others. But of course, if somebody is a bad actor and they're going to go out there and steal signs, try to set them up in places that you can track and capture the images of them stealing those signs. It's always worth doing that. Happens every year. It always happens around campaign season, so this is that time of year. So, and I understand why you'd feel that way about Ferguson, because yes, he probably offends a lot of people, and nobody's joking when they're talking about Bob Ferguson and being offensive. So let's jump in again. Thunder Striker 303, regular person with questions from Arizona. Hello again, Glenn. How was the Skagit County event in Washington State on Saturday? Want to apologize once more for not being able to come see you in person. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. That would be impressive if you came all the way out to Skagit County to see me at a Lincoln Day dinner, and I was just the MC. So, but that would have been a long ways for you to go. So I'd be very surprised if anybody would travel multiple states. But who knows? Maybe down in Arizona, if you want to organize an event and have me come down and speak, I could probably do that as well. But the Skagit County event was good. I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but I did want to mention, they had a lot of candidates running for office there. So the statewide candidates for treasurer, Republican candidates for treasurer, Sharon Hannock, an activist I've known a long time, Matt Hawkins from Spokane, who is running for the state auditor. You had Republican Party endorsed candidates that were there for Secretary of State and also for Governor. Semi Bird was there. He was the last main speaker of political candidates there. Jim Walsh was the chair of the state chair of the Washington State Republican Party. He gave the keynote speech at the end of the day. They were collecting signatures for I-2066, which is the repeal the gas tax ban, or I'm sorry, the repeal the natural gas ban that the Democrats have been trying to push. This is a good, by the way, this initiative is a big deal right now, because this initiative to the people, which needs to be completed pretty much by the end of June. We're already in the first week of June right now, and they're going to have to complete the signature gathering effort by the end of this month. Seems to be full steam ahead. I had some people contact me recently about the Showware Center in Kent, trying to prevent them from being able to collect signatures at a public venue like that, owned by the city of Kent. I don't believe that's legal. They're going to be fighting that issue probably for a while, but it's that same fight that we had last year in a number of other places around the state, and their ability to try to restrict your free speech and collecting signatures in these locations. However, I want to just reemphasize that If you are out there collecting those signature sheets, make sure you get them in as quick as you possibly can, because the tighter time frame that I-2066 has right now in collecting those signatures means that they need them in sooner so they can process them and get them prepared and get them ready to be turned into the Secretary of State's office. So that's a very important effort going on right now. As we have discussed many times in the show, there are 3 initiatives already that are going to be on the ballot in November in Washington State that are basically anti-tax initiatives. Vote yes, pay less. One of them is going to be to repeal Inslee's crazy Climate Commitment Act scam that increases the cost of fuel substantially, up to about 42 cents a gallon or more. So repealing that is going to be an obvious one, very popular one. Getting rid of the payroll tax, or at least allowing people to have the ability to opt out of the payroll tax for the already defunct long-term care scam that hasn't spent a penny to help anybody yet, and it's already doesn't, even though they've been collecting money on it now for a while, it's already underwater and incapable of supporting itself. It's a terrible, dumb idea that was really just a kickback scheme for SEIU. That is there. Also, the repeal of the capital gains tax, another scam that the Democrats have put through as a way to theoretically tax the rich, but of course what they're going to use it to do is tax everybody eventually. That's kind of their backdoor way to an income tax, and I say that with total clarity because that's what the Democrats who wrote the bill said in their own emails. They're bragging about it themselves, so they know that that's what they're trying to do there. It's a big deal. All these are options for you to vote on in November, and they're going to be above the presidential race, so it's a very important thing. Let's see. VTrack, here's a question, and this came up after we did our last live stream last week. It came up, I think it might have been the same day that I was doing a live stream or the day after. So we haven't even had a chance to talk about this. And the question is, in this case, is there anything to the stolen valor issue with Semi Bird? I've been traveling and haven't researched yet. Initial impression is that it's a smear, but I'm open to the facts. Well, so you got a couple of things going on here. And, listen, and I've had an interview with Semi Bird here. I've actually offered to also interview Dave Reichert, and I just haven't been able to fit that into the schedule yet. It's not been my fault as much as it's probably been his campaign's inability to schedule it, but because I think it's good if you could see what some of the alternatives, especially the alternatives to Bob Ferguson, the Attorney General, who is probably the worst human we can find on the state to actually be governor. But so I think it's good for people to at least hear what what these guys have to say about themselves or what they want to do in the state. And the stolen valor story right now is really one having to do with military records when Semi Bird was in the military. And I think the case is from 2009, and it has to do with a letter that he wrote to the Army at the time, or at least that's what the record that was released. Semi's position is that letter was illegally stolen from his military records and has been publicized, which may or may not be true. I don't know, but I'm not 100% sure how military personnel records are protected, because the various stories have tended to come up in the past about people in the military, and there are ways of going back and verifying if what they say about their military career is accurate or not. So, however, somebody obviously had access to this, and it did get public. And if you've seen it out there already, the Democrats have had it probably for about 6 months now. So if anybody, because Republicans are incompetent and pretty much incapable of doing background checks on anybody, let alone the Democrats. So Republicans just can't seem to do anything well when it comes to understanding the background of candidates. And because of that, there's been like a drip, drip, drip challenge that the Bird campaigns had to deal with just past disclosures on other challenges that he's had in the past. This one's probably one of the harder ones to deal with because it's a letter that basically says that he wore ribbons or medals that were not accurately reflected in what he'd actually earned. That was the big part of the argument there. I think there's probably still more that people are investigating on that story right now, but this has been one of many scandal stories that the Bird campaign has to deal with, and they have to answer. I I don't know a lot about it really, other than the fact that there's a document out there. It looks bad, and that Semi has said, and I heard him Saturday talking about how it was an illegal record taken from his public personnel file, which may very well be true, but you still have to deal with the underlying question is what really happened in 2009. It wasn't that long ago, and I think probably an explanation for what happened is probably helpful. So that's one of those issues right now that he's just going to have to deal with and answer. The challenge, of course, that the Byrd campaign has, bigger than, and it may be reflected in one of the challenges he's having, is the fact that his campaign's not raising enough money to really spread the word very far and wide. He got the Republican endorsement at the Republican convention, and if you were there, and I did a video on this, it was very clear that he had probably 2/3 of that room or more clearly supported Byrd for governor as the choices in the for the Republican choices for governor. He easily got that endorsement, but the endorsement didn't come with money necessarily. That was one of the challenges. They have given some money because he is their endorsed candidate, and they've given more attention to him, I think, than he'd be able to get otherwise. But the fundraising is the biggest challenge the Byrd campaign has. Now, some of that fundraising might be getting impacted by all these scandal stories that keep popping up. It's very hard for a campaign that continually has to go back and explain difficult challenges and explanations for problems or challenges in the past. Even the 30-year-old, financial fraud problem from the early 90s. I thought Byrd did a pretty good job trying to explain that, and he did explain that at the state convention, but that was a scandal that they were dealing with then, and now he's got this scandal right now, and it seems like kind of an ongoing thing. That makes it very challenging if you are a candidate to stay on your message if you're continually having to go back and have those explanations. So and the Democrats have all of this information about the Republican candidates that are running for office and more. They usually hold back and see who gets through the primary before they expose it. So the fact that these things are being talked about now and being addressed now is probably a good thing, because they would definitely be a lot worse to be addressing these in the post-primary period of time. So I still think it's worth the Byrd campaign probably coming out and trying to explain in more detail what that exact issue was with the whole stolen valor kind of argument there. And again, it's not the stolen valor argument. Mostly has to do with what the claim is, and what it looks like in that document is that he was wearing ribbons or medals. They always have. I'm not a military guy. I know my daughter's going to the Air Force. Going to the Air Force Academy, and I've had a lot of family members in the military, but they have the ribbons that are indicative of like service medals or other things that you wear, usually in this part of your uniform. And so the argument was that he was wearing stuff that he had not earned and awards that he had not earned, and the Army had chastised him for that, and so he had to deal with fixing and addressing that. And that's not a good thing to have in your record. So we'll see. But it does raise challenges to a political campaign, just the raw footage. And again, as I'm going to tell everybody, I'm going to go to the next question that was kind of related to this one, actually, from John Bauman. Please comment on all the allegations and concerns about the integrity of Semi Byrd. They seem valid. Do you still support him? And if not, then who? Now, I want to be clear. I have not officially supported anybody running for governor. I have clearly said that Bob Ferguson is the worst human being we could ever find in the state to be governor. So I think from that perspective, I'm very clear. But remember, I was also the campaign manager for another Bob Ferguson, two other Bob Fergusons who were going to run until the AG Bob Ferguson threatened to put him in prison. So I'm not officially endorsing anybody right now, but whoever comes out of the primary, I'm definitely going to endorse them against Ferguson, assuming that he survives the primary. It'd be beautiful if Bob Ferguson, the Attorney General, doesn't survive the primary, but the odds are likely with all the money that he's raised and the support that he has moving forward. So whoever is in opposition to Bob Ferguson is the person that we want to have running. We want to have in the governor's office over Bob Ferguson, the Attorney General, for sure. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. He's just the worst. Bob Ferguson, the Attorney General, is the worst guy I think that we could ever have. But again, going back to these challenges with Semi Byrd, if that was my campaign originally, and I knew that I had some of that baggage going into this campaign, one of my recommendations would be to address it up front. He's been campaigning the longest. If I was his campaign manager 2 years ago and I was aware of this stuff, I would have sat down with him and come up with a very clear path on explaining and dealing with that background. Anybody who's ever run for office, anybody who's ever looked into somebody who's run for office knows there's going to be things that they can come up in the background. It could be as dumb as speeding tickets. It could be as stupid as things like what Mitt Romney having the dog up in a box on top of his car. So there's silly things, but then there's big things. Contractual disputes, divorces, arrest records, convictions, military records that are different than what you represented. Those are just like the basic stuff. Bankruptcies, anything like that's going to inevitably come out of the woodwork, and people are going to want to look into those and say, you need to explain them. Sometimes people have good explanations for what happened, or there's another side of the story. But you want to address those early in your campaign, and waiting and thinking nobody's going to find them is a mistake, especially if you're running for a position like governor. There's no scenario at all that anything that you've done or that would result in formal legal documents like this aren't going to come out. Now, if you're a Democrat, they may not come out because the cover-up's usually a little bit better for them. And the Republicans are usually incompetent when it comes to looking into the background of politicians. There's so many times when I have found stuff in the background of Democrat politicians that the Republicans never once ever bothered to find or even look for, as far as I can tell. A common one is lying about their educational credentials. That seems to be one of the more common things that I found that nobody looks into. So we need to do a better job, generally, I think, looking into the background of candidates early. Candidates who have challenges or things in their background that doesn't prevent you from running for office, but it's very helpful if you would deal with it earlier. And I think the Byrd campaign would have done itself a tremendous service if they could have addressed some of this stuff early on, right up front, and had their story clear as to all of these things. I think they would be doing a better job with fundraising right now, and I think that they would have a lot less of a challenge for their candidate campaign now to be having to continually discuss things that I seriously doubt they wanted to be spend their time talking about 2 months out from the primary, and really about a little over a month before the first ballots drop. So that isn't good for any campaign, that's obvious, but that's definitely something that they need to work on. Rebecca Anderson, great question, and I think we talked about this here earlier. You have a question about how to get appointed as a conservative on a woke school board, and that's very hard. And let me explain how that works. When you're basically running for, there's 5 people on average in a school district who serve on the average school board. The only exception to that is Seattle, which has 7 on their school board. I'm talking about Washington State. So what happens is occasionally there's vacancies. People leave for a variety of reasons. And the process of applying to fill that vacancy is really left up to the school board. The remaining, in theory, there's 4 of them that are there on the school board. They have to appoint a replacement. Now, that doesn't mean you don't run for office, because you will still have to run for office. But in the interim, while you're waiting for that next election, they have to appoint somebody while they're waiting. In this case, the school board election for that position is going to come up in 2025. And so you're going to need to appoint somebody. That's usually the idea. And if you don't do it within a certain number of days, then the appointment decision can be pushed out to, usually the governor is the one who ends up making the decisions if they aren't able to find an agreement to the appointment. And remember, if you're in this case on a school board, there's 4 of you. You could have a tie 2-2, and there's no way to break it. And so I believe on school district races, and eventually that would go up to the governor, and the governor chooses. So I'm not 100% sure about that on school boards. I know that's how it works with county commissioners and representatives and statewide office holders and all these other positions, but I'm trying to remember for sure on school boards. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. But anyway, You need to represent yourself honestly to the school board. There's usually not a ton of people who want to be on the school board, but the appointment process is easier than running for an election, and it makes your re-election easier because you're already an incumbent when you're running for office the first time. So that it kind of smooths the path in you getting in there. If you're running as a conservative for a woke school board and, a bunch of the others are wokesters, then odds are if they believe that you're serious and capable, they probably won't appoint you to take that place. But represent yourself honestly and truly. Provide the value that maybe is lacking on the school board. Maybe there's nobody on the school board that's willing to do math or even believes it's real, and they still theoretically kind of want somebody to pay attention to the books, and they figure they're going to outvote you mostly anyway, but then you might provide some value in that direction. So I would say you come there with your priorities and skill set, and you show what you can provide them, and it's up to them to say no. But with the politicization, especially of so many of these local offices, especially the larger school districts, it's very difficult to get appointed. Sometimes it happens, but it's usually not going to happen. However, it's a great process to go through because it gives you a little bit more exposure to the school board. You stay and pay attention to it after that. If you really want to be on the school board, start going to their meetings after that and being prepared to run the next cycle that comes up, because even if they don't appoint you, they can't prevent you from running for office. As much as Bob Ferguson may like to imprison his political opponents, if they share his same name, they are unlikely to do that to you if you want to run for the school district, and it'd be nice to get more people in there. There's another question, and this is kind of out of the blue, but this is the question Alex Brown has. Did you see or hear anything about the Herrera versus Gonzalez race in Texas 23rd District? Extremely interesting race and results. Small guy stands up to big government and almost wins. I didn't, and so I'll have to look that up. I don't actually have anything of value to add to that conversation. I wish I did, but whatever it is, I'll have to look into that. So thank you. Let's see. By the way, you don't have to thank me for answering your question. I will do my best. But Janice, you had some good questions in the beginning, and yours were the first ones up. So this is the next question right here. Assuming I'm off topic, but curious of your thoughts regarding a sudden Biden replacement for presidential campaign. Tinfoil hats say there will be a surprise replacement. This is actually not as unlikely a scenario as some people might think. And you got to put yourself in the shoes of the Democratic Party, which really cares not a whit about process or tradition, really, or anything like that. It's really mostly a quest for power. And it's mainly because there's a big, big difference generally between people who want to use government as the tool to enrich themselves and beat up on others, and they want to control other people. And that tendency sometimes exists in some parts of the Republican Party, but it's the dominant ideology in the Democrat Party. They want to weaponize government and use it to abuse us and profit themselves. So there's almost anything, they'll do almost anything to retain that power, including throwing their leaders under the bus when they need to. And there's no doubt that Biden's been a clown and got dementia, and that he's a terrible candidate to run for office. And they kind of feel like they're stuck to this dead horse that they're trying to pretend like he's alive, like a weekend at Bernie's, and keep him going long enough to pretend like he's going to be the candidate. It's particularly true with all the polling that shows that despite the conviction of Donald Trump, which happened after our last live stream too, and the obvious politicized nature of a hyperpartisan judge whose daughter makes all this money, as a Democrat leftist who donated to the opponent of Trump, the same judge who jailed Trump's 73-year-old former treasurer at one of his businesses for getting free parking as a benefit. I mean, the same judge that won't touch violent criminals, they'll let them run free all over Manhattan, beating up people, attacking people, hurting cops, killing people. That's no problem in New York. But they're going to prioritize this very hyper-political attack on Trump, and it seems to have backfired when I look at the popularity I think that Trump has now, and then this perception that he's been able to create with this whole case that seems really pretty legitimate, that you're being politically abused by a weaponized apparatus that's just massive, attacking you. So what would you do if you're the Democrats? Well, the Democrats have got to be a little worried about Biden. I wouldn't blame them if they were. You would have to be brain dead not to be worried about Biden. because he's brain dead himself. And he's incapable of doing. I mean, look they can't even produce a 30-second video clip with him without having 7 or 8 jump cuts, which means the guy can't actually string a sentence along to basically give a 30-second ad. That's about 70 words, give or take. And that's too much for him to remember or say without apparently flubbing it. So if it's that bad for this guy, I can't even imagine what Biden would do in a debate. And that's, you got to be having some kind of a plan B. So I would say that that's increasingly more likely. The worse the polling gets for Biden and the better it gets for Trump. I mean, there's, it's not a tinfoil hat thing. It's a practical plan B that the Democrat Party needs to have. You got to put yourself in their shoes. They want the power more than anything. They don't care what laws they have to break to get there. They don't care what they do to you. They don't care what they do to the country. And so they still will have a little window of a time. It's not a lot, but they do have some window to pull somebody out of left field, even further left probably than Biden, and but somebody who maybe not, maybe doesn't have dementia, and doesn't sniff girls and doesn't do all the weird things that Biden does. So they'll have to pull somebody in. I don't know who for sure. There's a short list out there, of course. Governor Newsom is probably one of them. Kamala Harris, who's less popular than Biden. You probably have some other choices, but I think that's tough. I mean, they're in a tough spot, and I believe that they'll find a solution. And I think that's reasonably likely that could happen. Let's see, Steve Parker, good question here, relevant to some of the topics that we've had recently. Do you think Bob Ferguson will be sanctioned or anything for asking Secretary of State to move his name up on the ballot? Well, he did commit a crime in doing so. Longer conversation as to exactly what that crime is, because there's a specific it's like a malfeasance statute that deals with government officials trying to use their power to conspire with others to do things that profit themselves personally. Ferguson breaks the law all the time, but he's usually able to get away with it. This one was pretty significant. Now, when you say whether there's sanctions or anything, you're probably referring to the fact that Mark Mullet, one of the Democrats who is running against Bob Ferguson for governor as well, that Mark Mullet filed both a bar complaint against Ferguson and a state executive ethics complaint against Ferguson, neither of which, by the way, is going to be resolved before November anyway. So it starts the investigation process, but both those organizations are almost totally corrupted. I don't think you'd ever get a fair hearing at a bar association when it's the Attorney General. And the Attorney General always gets the most bar complaints filed against him every year, habitually. That goes back for decades. It doesn't matter which Attorney General you have, whoever it is, they're going to get a bunch of bar complaints against him. So by itself, getting a bar complaint against an Attorney General, sitting Attorney General, usually isn't as significant as people might think, because you're always going to see that people will flood the zone with bar complaints on the Attorney General. Now, in this case, this is an unusual bar complaint because it has merit and he clearly broke the law, and there's really nothing to argue about whether he did or not. There's no doubt he did. The question is, will they sanction him? I doubt it. The Washington State Bar Association is hyper-politicized. If you're a Republican that gets a bar complaint filed against you, they might sanction you. But generally, they give a free pass to most other attorneys, no matter what crimes they commit. Then the same, and it's even worse, actually, with the Executive Ethics Board, which is not to be confused with the Legislative Ethics Board. Totally different entity, totally different process, different staff members that run it. The Executive Ethics Board is basically a rubber stamp for the governor because he appoints those positions, and they're there to find excuses to ensure that anybody in the executive position in government or within the agencies under the governor are basically exempt from all ethics laws, and so they find an excuse to find a justification for whatever ethical violations that they have. I have filed them sometimes in the past. I still think they're kind of worthwhile to do it because it at least forces these kind of bureaucrats, the hyper-partisan bureaucrats there, to twist themselves into pretzels trying to justify why they refuse to actually enforce the law on one of their own. It's pretty typical, but it's still fun to do that sometimes. I'm glad Mark Mullet did it. I actually think Mark Mullet showed more spine, jumping in there and recognizing that he had spent $1 million and hadn't really moved the needle much in his voter awareness campaign, whatever that campaign's supposed to have been so far. So at least this gave him a little bit more attention, gives him a better chance at perhaps eroding away at some of Biden's or some of Ferguson's support. Freudian slip there. So, but we'll see. That's not alone. There's some other legal things that may be happening with Ferguson there, but we will see how it goes. Alex Brown, criminal punishment for stealing signs should be mandatory service for the candidate you were stealing signs of. Mandatory service for, I'm assuming. I actually think just going out, forcing them to go out and pick up garbage along the side of the road would be not a bad way to deal with it too. Devlin Hart, sorry. Are there going to be charges filed against Bob Ferguson for his pressuring Secretary of State to change the primary ballot? We'll see. If there are charges, remember they're criminal charges, and so the process of doing that isn't anything that I could control, but we'll see. Jason, you got a question here about, hey Glenn, I hope you're doing awesome, and what's your thoughts on the Trump verdict, and will they put him under house arrest? No, I actually think that judge is so bad and so corrupt and so tone deaf. And these guys, you got to remember that this political establishment, this elitist sort of political attitude that these people have, is so bad that they don't even get what putting Trump in jail would look like to them. So I think that he'll try to put him in jail. I don't even think house arrest. If they did house arrest, the whole point would be to keep him somewhere so he couldn't politically campaign. I think that would be their goal. So anyway, it's what's interesting to note, and I think sometimes people have to recognize this with Trump. I don't care if you like Trump or you didn't like Trump. I did not originally, I have to admit, I didn't think in 2016 that he was going to become president. I didn't think he had a chance. I figured that by that point in time, and I was a Ted Cruz guy in that particular race. I was one of the few times I've actually come out and been involved in a presidential campaign, and I was a Ted Cruz guy who lasted up until the end, and then he was the last one down, with Trump being the one who finally came through. And I knew Trump indirectly just as it dealt with property rights in New York City. I had two primary major policy differences with him on eminent domain, abuse of eminent domain, and civil asset forfeiture. Those are the two things, because with my property rights background, I'm strongly opposed to both, and Trump is in favor of both. Or at least he was. I'd be very curious to see if he's totally in favor of it the same way today. But and so because of that, I didn't like those policy positions. I still voted for Trump both times he was on the ballot, and there's no doubt. 2016, when I woke up the next morning, I laughed so hard when I saw the meltdown across the country over Trump getting elected, because it's so rare that you actually have a surprise in politics at that level. And by itself, that was funny. I think people continually and repeatedly underestimate this guy, and so I try not to underestimate the potential that he has in getting more support the crazier they get in attacking him, because to some extent Trump at this point in time, it's just become this totem for everybody that's ever been screwed over or is angry at government. And I think that people underestimate the kind of underdog effect, which is hard to imagine for a billionaire, but they actually have attacked this guy so much, they've turned him into an underdog. Americans tend to like underdogs, and especially when it looks like the forces, of evil are coming and opposed to you, and they're doing so many crazy and ridiculous and absurd things against this guy that they've never done to anybody else in American history that I can find. And so that's going to result in unusual outcomes. I don't think the surveys are going to be accurate, and I don't know what that means, but we're living in crazy times with all the stuff that's going on here. TZ Burton, I met Brandy Cruz at the I-2066 Stop the Gas ban in Bellevue. How's our chances of getting that initiative on the ballot? Great question, and I would say pretty high at this point in time. When I checked in with the signature gatherers, because Let's Go Washington's doing a lot of signature gathering efforts, and I know sometimes when I see them in places, I'll collect them together and hand them off to those people like any good volunteer would do. But they seem to be doing really well in the signature gathering. There's no problem getting signatures. If you're out there collecting signatures on this, and I've been out there a few times where I volunteered to grab a sheet and run around and see who'd be interested in signing it. It's a good exercise, by the way, if you just want to meet people, bring this around. Most people will sign it. It's very rare somebody doesn't sign it. It's a stupid policy choice. It isn't a total gas ban, as we discussed when I talked about this on a couple of my videos about the I-2066 initiative, But the underlying bill that it's opposing is setting the foundation to ban gas in the future, and it's a kickback scheme for Puget Sound Energy, which is going to simply increase the cost of providing utility services to you and I without the protection of the UTC, the Utilities Transportation Commission, that would normally be overseeing any utility cost increase. So repealing this is of that particular the gas ban is a good idea, and it would add a fourth initiative on the ballot in November if it gets in, and it should. That are all the same. They're easy to remember. Vote yes, pay less. You vote yes for those four, pay less. It's not hard to remember. So they're getting a lot of signatures, and a tremendous amount wherever they go. And a large number of people are out there collecting signatures, which is really the number that matters, because the average person out there collecting signatures, if you get hundreds and hundreds of these people doing it, then that's how you get the numbers. Remember, they have to go a lot faster and collect the same amount of signatures that they did last year in 6 months. They have to collect it in about a month. So for one initiative, that's tough. But it looks to me like they're getting it. They're making it happen. Yep, realtors are getting a lot of signatures. I'm hearing the same thing. Doesn't matter which group you're in. Everybody's getting a lot of signatures. If they're asking for them, they tend to be getting them. Is there a map where they're collecting signatures for the state on I-2066? I believe Let's Go Washington is the closest, or maybe the only organization that officially has a map up there. But that's just the bare minimum. There's actually a lot of people collecting signatures you don't see on that map. A lot of the groups, some of them are paid signature gatherers. You'll see them at Walmart. You'll see them all over the state. And they travel around and collect signatures everywhere. I think if you haven't seen it out there, you can also contact Let's Go Washington directly and get a signature sheet. Sign it yourself, get your nearest 19 friends to sign it with you, and then mail that back into them right away. Do it quickly. And I think that makes it, that's a pretty big deal. Let's see. Rex, here's a question. Glenn, I may have missed this already. You already answering this question, but would like to know if the two Bob Fergusons from Yakima are going to be eligible to run for governor. For clarity, the one Bob Ferguson was from Yakima, one was actually from Graham, Washington, and both of them are not eligible now. Well, they were eligible to run for governor, but they both dropped out after Bob Ferguson threatened to imprison them and destroy their lives, and put it in writing and threatened. It was pretty crazy, actually. So they're not on the ballot now, but only one Bob Ferguson's on the ballot. It did rip the mask off of exactly what kind of a tyrant and terrible human being that Bob Ferguson is, the Attorney General. These guys were way better than him in every measurable way, and would be a lot better. But it's one of those that is going to be. We're kind of back to where we were before they filed, but yeah, they were not able. They didn't want to deal with going to jail. Or really, I don't think they would have got to jail in the end, because I think it's an unconstitutional law. But it would have been a big legal fight, and they would have had to be dealing with that. It would have been tough for them to be able to deal with that. This is a question from Cindy here. Is Semi Bird compromised with stolen valor? And again, going back to when I talked about this earlier in the show, this is the same question again in regards to this stolen valor scandal that Semi Bird's really dealing with right now, from the 2009 letter that came out of its personnel file. And I think Semi's going to probably have to address this much more head on and directly and explain what really happened there, because that letter is something that he wrote at the time in the military. It may very well have been stolen from his military files, but he's going to have to try to answer that directly and head on. And maybe he already has, and I just haven't seen it. But I think it's difficult when your campaign's continually having to address these issues. Again, though, even before this, if you don't have enough money to market yourself and get your campaign message out there to a wide enough audience, not just the people that you see at Lincoln Day dinners or at a state convention, but to a much wider audience, that's your biggest challenge to overcome. If you have $7 million in the bank, it's a lot easier to sell yourself as a candidate out there, even if you do have a lot of things you're trying to explain. A lot harder when you have continuously things like this. And the Bird campaign, this is not a secret. If Semi's sitting right here, I'd be saying the same thing. If you're having to deal with this stuff, it is not making your campaign go any smoother. And so you want to usually deal with that stuff early if you can, and not wait and have them show up later as surprises. You are not going to keep any secrets if you're running for office, especially at that level. Honor your oath, West's civil rights. If anyone has difficulty with access to collect signatures on initiative petitions, I may be able to help. You can contact me through Glenn. Okay, well, I'm not sure that I know exactly who you are, but I'm happy to help. I do get people occasionally contact me. The Showware Center just recently came up in Kent about them attempting to harass signature gatherers and prevent them from collecting signatures at a publicly funded and owned facility like that, which I don't think they can do. So we'll have to see how that goes. But I do refer people to others who are pretty good about staying on top of this stuff. So here's a question, Gregorius Greg. That's not a question. Can't answer it. But thanks for saying hi. Let's see. Semibird released all documents of his medals earned from the military. They're on his website. Tell the truth. Okay, no, that's fine. I don't think that's the issue of the reason why the story came out. But I'm glad that he's done that. I think that's a good step. Probably. That would have been something good to probably put out earlier, but I'll have to go back and look and see what he's put up on that because I haven't actually seen the updates there. But again, the challenge that you have is going to be brought up here. This is why you have to explain it, is because of that letter from 2009. It's possible that you could explain it and justify it, but again, this isn't how a political campaign wants to spend its time. If I was in the Byrd campaign, that's not how I'd want to spend my time either. So, it's not something that the military is going to be want you to do, and that's not, you're going to have to address it. And it doesn't sound good. It doesn't look good based on that letter. So, but identifying all the medals you won, because I think he had plenty of recognition and appeared to have served with honor with the medals that he received, so that it's definitely an issue and a problem there. The Copsicle RCW 9.41220, unlawful firearms and parts contraband, really a thing, and it shall be the duty of all peace officers and/or officer or member of the armed forces. I don't know. I'm gonna have to look I don't know that statute right off the top of my head, so. If it's RCW 9, it's dealing with the criminal statute. Not everything in there is great, but let's go see. So I can't answer that question without a little bit more background on it, and I just don't have it. I'm sorry. Nate W., what do you tell people that say the natural gas ban bill only affects new or future construction? Utilities can stop service, ? Manufacturers can stop making equipment for homeowners to buy. So I don't think that's so much the issue. They'll argue, they being the supporters of the natural gas ban effort, the actual piece of legislation that came out of the legislator, it doesn't officially ban natural gas outright. What it does is it sets the foundation to ban it in the near future. We have seen this time and time and time and time again with government and the elected officials. It is a slippery slope, but it's not even that slippery. It's clearly a stair step set up so that they can take away natural gas from homes. Yes, making it harder for future construction or making it so they don't have to put it into future construction is part of the problem, because once you start eliminating that as an option, but more significantly, one of the things that bothered me the most about that particular bill and what I think this initiative repeals is this kickback scheme to Puget Sound Energy, which is the largest private utility in Western Washington, mostly centered around King, but it services over 1.2 million, if I remember right, customers. So it's the largest private utility in the state, giving them a pass with the UTC so they can raise their rates, whether or not you have natural gas, to make up for how they want to write down all the natural gas infrastructure expenditures you have, simply as a way to buy off a private utility, so they don't oppose your effort in the future. That's corruption. I'm sorry. It's just plain, flat-out corruption. It's part of the overall national campaign that Democrats have had for some bizarre reason, claiming climate change, but it's really just been a strange approach and obsession about at every single step of the way, making the cost of living for you and I a lot more expensive. The Democrats, without fail, consistently, every single time, have done everything they can to make the cost of power, to make the cost of construction, to make the cost of driving, to make the cost of living, make the cost of education, make the cost of healthcare, every single time, make that more expensive for everybody. And that is something I'm vehemently opposed to in all these cases. And the natural gas people just happen to like it. So that's one of the things that that people don't realize is that, or that the supporters of natural gas banning don't seem to be aware of. A lot of people like natural gas and they like to cook with it. So anyway, again, I'm going to try to stick to the questions because I'm getting a lot of comments back and forth, which is great. You can comment all you want back and forth, but I'm going to try to get to any questions that people might have. And again, I'm going to jump down to some of these questions here. Hey, Glenn, I just want to let you know that I won't be joining the live stream next week on Monday or Tuesday. Okay, so that's not a question either. Let's see. I was TZ Burton. I was leaning liberal until they nominated Chase Oliver. I think you're actually talking about libertarian. I'm hopeful that was helpful with talking about that case. There's obviously more to it than what I was able to cover here. But that whole drama story came out last week after I did the live stream. Shaded Muse at We the Governed. We the Governed ED, but that's okay. Mark Mullet, and it's MARK. Mark Mullet has filed a complaint against Sideshow Bob. Will Mark get added to Sideshow Bob's hit list of people who has done him wrong? And the answer is absolutely yes, and he already is. You got to remember when Mark Mullet, who's a Democrat in Issaquah, his dad used to be the mayor of Tukwila, by the way. Just a little political background there. Mark Mullet's biggest problem is that he is a Democrat who understands that math is real. You're no longer allowed to believe that if you're a Democrat. And so the problem is, the problem that you end up having there is that he had already stepped on a variety of toes in the Senate because he would oftentimes support pro-business or at least math recognizing bills in the Senate, or he'd oppose them if the Democrats were trying to do things. And so what happens is that makes you persona non grata in the Democrat Party. So 4 years ago, Inslee intervened to try to bounce Mark Mullet out of the state Senate. They had the same problem with Hobbs, by the way, who's currently the Secretary of State and who's also in a fight with Ferguson over this issue. And Hobbs also can, even though I would probably disagree with him on a lot of policies, Hobbs has the unfortunate ability to understand math and believe that it's real. And these are not allowed. You're not allowed to be that way in the Democrat Party any longer. And so in Hobbs' case, they bribed him with a seat and appointment to Secretary of State's office. In Mullet's case, Inslee came out and attacked him. The whole Democrat Party tried to take him out of Issaquah, out of the Senate seat. He barely won. It was like 56 votes. It was some very narrow margin. The Republicans, obviously, in the primary shifted over to vote for him compared to the crazy lunatic he was running against. Doesn't make him a Republican, doesn't make him conservative. It just made him better than the crazy person that Inslee was supporting, and Inslee lost that. And Inslee was upset because his objective and Ferguson's objective, which Ferguson helped him in that too, wasn't obtained, right? They weren't able to get through that. So they were upset about that. So what I think is going to happen is that Mullet has been on Sideshow Bob's list for a long time now. And this simply, all this is throwing fuel on that fire. So yes, he filed the bar complaint and the executive ethics complaint, and that's going to be not exactly helping him quite a bit. John Bauman, Brandy Cruz's YouTube channel has more info on the allegations about Semi-Bird that seem credible. It's not just stolen valor. There's a lot more. I mean, he's had to deal with a number of different scandals, right? There's no doubt about that. There were a couple other issues that had come up in the stolen valor scandal that Semi's dealing with. But when it's a he said kind of argument from other people, and you're not able to document all of that very easily, I think that's harder because people can come out and say whatever they want. It's the document that I think is the most difficult issue that Bird has to probably address moving forward. So anyway, that's what I think. And now, Gregorius Greg, when are you training again in Whatcom or Skagit County areas? I could be training up there in a couple weeks, but you have to set up a schedule. I know that I have an August event coming up, I think in San Juan County, I'm not sure if we finalize that, and I know there's a June event coming up again. I didn't write it down today, so I'll have to bring that into the next event. It wasn't within the next week. I'm kind of caught up in graduation right now for some kids, but we'll see about this. Let's see. And again, Scotty475, yeah, between the 90s fraud, which was something that Bird did come out and admit and say that he did in the early 90s, 30 some odd years ago. Again, this would be the kind of thing that if I was in his shoes, I would have definitely tried to raise this earlier and address it earlier. But now this issue, the baggage challenge, is going to be one you have to overcome, and I mean that's just what you have to do. Rumors don't mean anything. There's rumors about all kinds of people. I can't even begin to tell you how many rumors that I get about every single politician in the state, Democrat or Republican, most of which either can't be substantiated because there's really nothing behind it, or there's no real evidence. And in which case, why would you, if you're going to run out every single rumor that's out there, you got a lot of stuff to talk about. And I don't know. Let's see, Jack, you have a question here. What does your crystal ball tell you about the next 6 months? And will be like worldwide and in the U.S. I think we're in for tough times right now. I mean, a little bit. I always think you want to be prepared at as best you can where you live with your family and your friends, your neighbors, to take care of yourselves if there are really tough times that come ahead. No matter what, that's probably a good plan. And I think that no matter who wins in November, there's going to be chaos in America to some extent, some level of political chaos. It's probably a little bit more, you got to remember when Trump won in 2016, what the media wants to conveniently forget about right now were the years of violent protests and arson and destruction and attempts to deny the election that went on with every Democrat that's elected in the country that I'm aware of, and every single person that was in any position of power in the Democrat Party. So a lot of that was going on. They want to memory hold that and pretend like it didn't happen today, but it did. And so I would anticipate that if Trump gets elected, the Democrats go into meltdown, arson, destruction mode. If Biden gets, if he's still, able to stand upright and somebody's able to keep him alive, like Weekend at Bernie's, if somebody like that gets elected, you're going to have probably less about riots and arson, but you're going to have probably some bigger challenges in the country as well. I mean, no matter what, the policies are destructive for the country right now, and that's a big challenge. How you overcome that, the escalating deficit that can never be repaid. There's no way to mathematically repay it. The inflation problems, the incompetent and self-destructive foreign policy direction the country's taken right now, which puts us at a serious risk, allowing lots of illegals you don't vet and come across the country, including inevitably lots of people who want to do harm in this country and not paying any attention to who they are. You're just asking for trouble. I've done plenty of videos about the risks in the power grid and other things in the past. So I think it could be really tough. So, one of the things you always want to do and should be part of your life is be prepared. The Boy Scout motto, always be prepared. It's an excellent motto, probably one of the best I've ever known. Pay attention, have a plan to help your family and protect your family and to work with others. You're not going to be an island. You're not going to be a bunker to yourself. You're going to have to work with others in your neighborhood and your community. I would try to do something about that and make sure your plans are in pretty good, you have a pretty good emergency plan in case something really tough happens. Jason asking, what's your thoughts on the Seattle police chief resigning? It seems to be a revolving door of police chiefs in Seattle. Will the new chief be any better? There's no way to know. And yeah, it's terrible in Seattle right now. It's always hard when you have leadership turnover like this. Sometimes leadership turnover can create a positive surprise where you get somebody in who's better than was there before. I really don't know the new police chief in Seattle to know whether they're any better or not than the previous one. But the challenge is, and I would generally trust, if I talk to enough Seattle police officers, I haven't talked to any real lately, enough with any volume, and a number of them that I knew are retired or they've left, so I'd have to talk to some more of them. Jason Rantz talked to quite a few. Aria Hoffman has some pretty good contacts when you hear about them talking on the radio in Seattle about what their thoughts are. I would generally go with my gut on what the average officer is talking about there. But the challenge, of course, is that when you have that revolving door and people keep changing, it doesn't make it stable in the city. And Seattle's our biggest city. We need it to be we need to be semi-controlled and not entirely into anarchy and meltdown mode. Now, one of the problems, of course, is Seattle's exporting their problems to Edmonds and to Bellevue and to Kirkland and to the cities around them so that they can keep their level of chaos looking like it's not as bad as it really is by exporting the drug problems and the junkies and the grifting operations into the surrounding communities. So, are we seeing Mexican nationals voting in Seattle and D.C.? We need only Americans to vote. Well, voting versus getting registered to vote is two different questions. So, yes, they're getting registered to vote in Washington State. Most non-citizens are getting registered to vote in Washington State. Should they be? No. But I have met dozens and dozens and dozens from people who are here legally on visas, student visas, H-1B visas, worker visas, and they're all getting registered to vote. Green cards, right? They're getting registered to vote whether they want to or not. Even if they tell them not to register them to vote, they'll be registered to vote. How many of them actually vote? If they're educated at all about it, they usually don't. The problem that I have found is some of the less educated people who are getting registered to vote, they may know that they can't vote, but people will pay them to buy their ballot. The going rate a couple years ago was $30 a ballot. So they're selling their ballots. How much is it? Probably not a huge number, but it's a decent number, and nobody's bothering to look at it. Your Secretary of State will never look at it. Your auditors are wanting to look the other way. Nobody really wants to pay attention, and one of the ways it makes it very hard to audit this is there's no list provided. By the way, this wasn't provided under the Trump administration when I was asking for it then, and it's certainly not provided now under the Biden administration. It's just a list of all the legal non-U.S. citizens that exist in the country. There's no shouldn't be a secret on that. They're here legally. They have a reason to be here. But how many of them are registered to vote? Nobody will tell you. So the only people you know are the ones that actually tell you that they're registered to vote, even though they tried not to be. And they show you the ballots and they come and hand it to you. But it's a problem. And they do it all the time. And I agreed, Americans only should be able to vote. And in Washington State, you need to be a Washington State resident to vote. I know it says that in our state constitution, but they're allowing a lot of other problems. And believe me, as a guy who's actually been trying to go out there and make a difference on it, there's a lot of work to be done. We've made a lot of headway in being able to identify some of these problems, but no thanks to the Secretary of State or the auditors who generally, not all of them, some of them have been a little more cooperative. And I feel like there's a slight trend changing where they're more willing to work with us on some of the voter roll cleanup, but we still got a long ways to go. Stephen Brook, do you think Trump will make an appearance in Washington State? Well, I have no idea. I mean, maybe. He's kind of surprising. He runs a maverick sort of campaign, and he does. He made a lot of appearances in 2020, which surprised me in Washington State, some huge ones, actually. And so maybe he will come out here. I don't know, but it's an issue. Tim Barnett, we have RVs living on our road. Cops say they can't interfere about RVs living by our driveways. Great question. Depends on where you live. So there are some local rules, some local laws that have been implemented, but I'm sorry that you're having to deal with that. Most of those are roving meth labs or criminal operations, unfortunately. Not all of them, but some of them are. And until the homeless industrial complex kind of gets addressed and the grifting operations that are associated gets addressed, then I think we're just going to continue to have some other issues related to that moving forward. Let's see. We've got I just think this is funny. Listen, in 2016, I thought Hillary was going to win too, and I was wrong. Let's see. RVs living under wires on Bonneville. Bonneville doesn't want them under their lines, but they're still there. Great question, Tim. It seems like those are a little bit easier for them to remove and move on somewhere else. So we'll see what happens. Let's see. Free the vote. Daniel, you're saying, please mention Free the Vote Washington. Free the Vote Washington, I'll mention it. Listen, there's a lot of stuff going on out there to try to help clean up the voter rolls and make an impact in the state. I'm involved in some of them, not all of it, but I'm trying to help out anything. So we'll see how it goes. Daniel, you say, seems YouTube doesn't like it when you chat anything with the word dot in it. I had 2 chats passed up by you. You must have been deleted by YouTube. I don't know if I did or not, but I am trying to skip to the question. So I'm not purposely trying to skip any of these questions here, but I do want to make sure that I can get to as many of those as I can. The last couple times I've been doing this, I had a hard time staying up with all the questions. Let's see. Glen Morgan and Todd Herman should do an event in Spokane. Sure, I'd love to do an event with Todd out there anytime. Todd's a friend. I've known him for a long time, and that's the. I'd love to go out there and see him. Let's see. Going down here. Shaded Muse, Reichert's just as bad as Sideshow Bob. No, that's not true. Bob's actually absolutely the worst. And this is not true. It doesn't really matter which person you're supporting against Bob Ferguson, but every single person, there's 28 people on the ballot, and 27 of them are superior to Bob Ferguson. Every one of them's better. Most of them are going to disappear after the primary, of course, because only top 2 get through. So, vote wisely and pick your choice. But I don't think I don't think you can say things like that and have it be honest. It doesn't mean that you can't have disagreements with Reichert. I do, probably policy-wise, but the truth is, I bet if Bert and I sat down and we talked policy, we'd probably have disagreements too. That's pretty normal. But converting the problems that you have with somebody and then trying to say that because you have those differences that they're as bad as Bob Ferguson, who's almost the worst politician I could imagine we've ever had running for governor, is just not honest. I don't think it is anyway. So, but love your comment. Thank you for making that. Will the NRA versus VULO make it easier to call out of state for First Amendment violations going forward, like their COVID stances? I don't know. I will tell you one thing about the NRA New York case, which for those of you who haven't been watching, the Supreme Court actually ruled unanimously in favor of the NRA, unanimous. So that includes even the crazy leftists on the Supreme Court, clearly said that New York was completely wrong and abusive where they went after the NRA and attempted to make it so they couldn't bank or deplatform them or have them lose their vendor relationships. And it was a slapdown to the state. NRA completely won that. They deserved to win it. It was a big deal. And the video actually I have coming out this week about Bob Ferguson talking about him attempting to abuse these pro-life groups in our state. Clearly, Ferguson, I think, was aware of what that NRA case was and didn't want it to blow back on him in what was going to be another losing case, and he abandoned his effort to harass them just last week. So that's kind of a big deal. And so even though these legal cases, people oftentimes listen, you don't like it because it takes forever to get there. But even when they do happen, and there's been a sequence of them that are clearly trying to stand up to some extent, restore the freedoms, or at least make it more clear that our freedoms should be restored and not abused the way they are, they'll have influence on other decisions, even with a crazy, terrible tyrant like Bob Ferguson. So I think that's important. Let's see, Ted C. Glenn, what are the chances of going to major party number 1 endorsed candidates first in the voting manual? Their random order seems to always benefit the number 1 Democrat. That is not going to happen unless you change state law. State law simply provides them the ability to draw at random who's going to be in which position. It's probably more fair in a lot of ways than what somebody would be. And I'm going to tell you that if this was the case, so if the major party would always be benefited by the random order, then Bob Ferguson wouldn't have drawn lucky number 13 in the original drawing for the governor's race. So it isn't always biased against him. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. And Deanne Sanderson, this really isn't a question, but I'll just, because everybody's been asking so many Semi Bird questions, and this is another add to this. But Jason Rance has a full story on Semi. Very conservative. I like what Semi says on his podcast, but I think he's a liar. He's more concerned about the document being illegally obtained. Okay, so listen, I'm not going to call Bird a liar. I'm just going to say that focusing that the document was obtained illegally is not going to be the winning strategy in addressing the issue that's being raised. So that's the whole thing. You're going to want to focus on addressing that issue and not going over here being worried about it illegally obtained, as much as it might have been. I don't know. I've seen this happen now. A number of other Republicans who will have their military records, including stuff they think isn't out there, become public. So try to be aware of that if you're going to run for office. Why don't you volunteer for Sammy Bird's campaign? Especially in the primaries, I almost never volunteer for anybody's campaign. And if you've been paying attention to what I've done over the last couple months, because I was the listed campaign manager for two of the other Bob Ferguson candidates and all the drama that happened about a month ago, that had taken some of my time. Now, I've got a lot of other things I'm working on. Generally, I don't jump into too many of these campaigns. I'll help candidates if I'm at the same event, if they need somebody to get up there and help introduce them, or speaking at some of their fundraisers. I've done that a number of times over the years. I've attended a lot of them over the years. Anyway, so I'm not going to volunteer for a political campaign. There's too many of them. A lot of them are my friends, a lot of people I've known for a long time. I'm just not able to cover them all. Let's see. Cucumber Road local. This is a question. Just moved back to Spokane. Our pristine aquifer water is now fluoridated. Question mark. I'm buying bottled water, waiting for expensive water filters to filter out that neurotoxic chemical. What to do? There's a big movement in Spokane. You're not alone. This has come up in numerous other cities in Washington State. I think putting fluoride in the water is a terrible idea because it removes choice from people. If they want to drink fluoride, they can do it on their own. Why do they make everybody drink it? The benefits, quote-unquote, benefits for your teeth are not worth other potential issues, and I just don't like the idea of shoving stuff down people's throat. So I would support defluorinating that water supply out there for sure. I don't see any benefit in it, no real benefit at all. And so, but that fortunately is something you can actually change at a local level. So anyway, let's see. Question from Alex Brown. If the 6 Let's Go Washington ballot initiatives do go through and change the law, is it possible to use that method of change on things like the $30 car tabs or gun control laws as well? And the answer to that is yes, Alex. It is possible, but of those 6 initiatives that the Let's Go Washington people did, all 6 of them were qualified. 3 of them are law today. Actually, I think it is all the 3 that they passed in the legislature are law now. The other 3 will be on the ballot this November, have the potential to become law if you vote for it. And the answer is yes, it is a method of change potentially for both $30 car tabs and gun control laws as well. And so the future represents a lot of options in the future, so we'll just have to see what they are. Breaking bolts. Do any thoughts about the federally funded rural fiber optic install? Do I have any? I'm assuming that's what you're asking. I have concerns about the potential for infringements on property rights and eminent domain. Boy, I don't typically have too many problems with the rural fiber optic installation, so I'm not sure what the eminent domain concerns might be there. Part of this is that they're treating it like a utility, like phone lines, and so I would need to know something a little bit more specifically about what your concerns might be about that. So I don't have any big concerns that I'm aware of right now. But anytime eminent domain comes up, then I tend to get concerned. So I'm not aware of any eminent domain challenges that we're facing right now as it relates to to that. Pat Caldwell had a question. Are you getting Reichert's schedule for an interview? I've reached out to his campaign. I've talked to a couple people there. I don't want to blame anybody because it's partially my schedule's weird and so is theirs. And so it's been hard to line up and I just haven't lined anything up yet. Bird was very cooperative when I did his, but it was also earlier in the campaign season. It's a little bit harder as we move along. And I just know that that's true. Let's see. Blydent Demir, I'm a new resident in Snohomish County. I just saw my DOL renewal is almost $500 because of the RTA tax. Is there a way to opt out of this tax? The answer is yes, move your vehicle registration outside of the RTA zone. They'll tell you that's not legal. It needs to be attached to your residence, but the reality is tons of people register their cars somewhere else now directly because of that RTA tax. It is absurd. It is ridiculous, and almost all the money you give them gets wasted. So a lot of people are trying to find ways of getting out of it, and that's usually how they do it. Let's see. I love food. What are the chances Washington will give us our rights back in terms of owning a rifle? I moved 15 minutes into the state from Idaho, and we are wondering if it'll change soon. It really depends on the nature of several court cases that are moving forward, which look good and strong. And, This reminds me of the 1986 assault weapons ban that Reagan signed, if you remember that, if you lived through that. I feel like we're in that kind of a zone because they're unconstitutional and they should be removed. So we'll see what happens. But I do think that there's a high likelihood that we'll overturn those. Also, the high-capacity magazine ban. I mean, there's a bunch of other things that I think get addressed mostly around the same time. Hopefully they do. That's awful. Fluoridation, wells, and aquifers. Yes, now remember they're not putting fluoride in the aquifer. They're pulling the water out of the aquifer, and then that's when they add the fluoride to it. So I think it's important to kind of remember. Okay, Ted Cruz supporter. Yes, I was back then at the time. I don't know if that's suspect, but maybe that makes me a suspect. I generally don't get involved in the I generally don't get involved in presidential races much at all. I did back in the 90s when I was a college Republican in college, and then after that I just wasn't that interested in it. But I had some contact that I remember having with Ted Cruz when he was in college, and I went to a different school, but we were doing some conservative organizations at the time, and I remember it wouldn't have been like we were close friends at all, but there was a passing acquaintance and familiarity with him at the time. So it was somebody. It's not like I have many people that would be running for office that would be like that. So that's how it is. Let's see. Semi-country living. Is it true that Semi struck a commanding officer? And I mean, that would be 3 strikes. It is true, and Semi talked about it on the show when I interviewed him. That was one of the issues at the time. That was the issue he was addressing, and I thought he addressed it pretty straightforward because at least his story and his explanation for why he did. We got to remember that happened when he was in one branch of the service. He came back and joined the Army later, and had his full term there. So that was when he was in the military at a different time. You can go back and look at the interview, and he addressed that question. But yeah, he definitely was found. He got in trouble for that for sure at the time, and he's talked about it numerous times. Let's see. Is it reasonable to prosecute one who threatens his or her opponents with jail time in the current campaign season? Well, is it reasonable to threaten to throw people in jail? I don't know, but that's how the Democrats roll, and I imagine that's what they want to continue to roll with. Scenario Frankenstein. I'm trying to get through the last of these questions if I can. If I can get them through, I'll be very happy. Seems we are doomed to have Ferguson now that Byrd seems to be faltering. How the heck will we survive? Listen. Always be careful, and maybe if I was going to solve anything here, really, the thing to remember about politics and politicians, never really put your faith as like a cult of personality in politicians. This is a good rule of thumb to have anyway. I have a lot of friends who've run for political office. I've run for political office, been elected, and I've lost both. I've experienced both in my time. And politicians are the tool through which you hopefully they represent you correctly, and they can push liberty and freedom and good agendas. Nobody's going to be perfect. And I think expecting perfection is irrational and it means you put your politician up on a pedestal they don't deserve to be on. They work for you, and they are flawed human beings with all the flaws that human beings will come with. What you're hoping to is have people that will go in there and do what they say and say what they're going to do. That's the best you can hope for, usually, and that, while they may make mistakes, that they'll generally recognize they made a mistake and try to correct their actions and try to make as few mistakes while they try to push for freedom and liberty moving forward. That's all we can hope for with our politicians. I think it's very dangerous to put them up on a pedestal and think that they're somehow untouchable or unquestionable. That's a big, big mistake. You can't ever do that, should never do that, and it doesn't matter whether they're on the school board or president. When they're personal friends of yours, as some of them have been for me, it's a little hard to separate that. And sometimes you have to. You have to recognize they've gone into office there, and I don't understand what they're doing over here. And so I'll talk to them, and I'll say, why are you making that? I think it's a mistake. And they'll explain why they did it. And then I can at least understand. Doesn't mean I agree with them sometimes, but I'll understand, okay, that was not what I thought it was. Or I understand your reasoning behind it. I disagree. Let me explain to you why I think it's bad, right? I've had that discussion with them several times. And that's beneficial if you can do that, I think. But don't presume that suddenly that if you put your faith and your hope in the politicians to save you, it's like putting your faith in something else that's going to be a guaranteed failure. You have to save yourself. We all have to. We have to stay on top of these guys. There's no such thing as perfection. You're never going to have the angels in government. You're going to have people that can be very good and very effective and surprisingly capable of turning things around when they do the right things. At the same time, you're going to have situations happen where somebody gets in and they seem like they're the Satan incarnate, and they either blow themselves up so much or they turn everything around in such a crazy way that the outcomes are completely unpredictable. I don't know if there's any way to necessarily predict what the outcome would be. Because I care about my neighbors, my family, and our state's future, I don't want Ferguson in there as governor. I know he's a bad guy. And anybody else would, running for office, all 29 of his opponents, even the fraudster gal, there's like a fraudster Democrat that's running, even she would be better than Ferguson because she's probably just trying to steal money. And so getting somebody in there who just steals money but they aren't capable enough to hurt you is still better than Bob Ferguson, who's going to be focused on trying to hurt you or at least punishing his political enemies. So, that's something that I think we have to be very aware that, you can't presume that you're going to be that your safety, your future is going to be in the hands of those politicians. You want to really push back on bad ones. You want to replace bad ones. You want to educate people so that they don't elect bad ones. But anyway, there's just a bunch of issues on this, and I think that people who are in doom and gloom mode all the time, you have to be really careful about that, because I've heard the doom and gloom story now since I was 10. And the stories never change. Every single election is the most important. Now, I do think eventually you do reach tipping points, and there's bigger issues to look at regarding society in general and the budget and world affairs and big things that can have a big impact. But I think that, just be aware that no matter who gets elected, there's going to be challenges to face. And obsessing about right now, we don't know who's going to be opposed to Ferguson. I'm assuming Ferguson survives a primary now. But if he doesn't, that'd be the jump for joy. That's great. But anyway, I just wouldn't be that obsessed about the whole world coming to an end just because your politician doesn't get elected. I don't understand how somebody can support Bob Ferguson. What is it that people like about him? I don't think they really I've never met anybody that says they like Bob Ferguson. I've met people who say that they think they can profit under Bob Ferguson because they're part of the system and they plan on grifting off the state, and Ferguson gives them a free pass and lets them grift as long as they send votes his way. I have met people who fear Bob Ferguson, and so they support him because they don't know what else to do. But those are all the different issues that you're going to see out there. Let's see. Did you hear about Star? I'm right down to the end here, guys, and I know I'm running a little late on time, so maybe I'll wrap this up here. Did you hear about the Seattle area city to host taxpayer-funded LGBTQ pride catwalk for toddlers? Democrat State Senator Mark Elias and 2 Linwood City Council members will be judging the show June 8th. No, I didn't hear about that. Sounds creepy and weird. Mark Elias is one of the creepiest politicians that we do have in Olympia, so I'm not surprised he's involved. But, we've got clowns, and it's not a good thing to have these people in government. Mark Elias is one of the biggest embarrassments we've ever elected at state. Just what a clown. It's too bad that he's in there. I'm in my early 20s, not from Washington. If I want to enter the politics and possibly make a difference, is there anywhere you'd recommend to start for education? Yes, there is. It depends where you live, but I would start either at the school board or city council. If you live in the city, start at the city council. If you live outside of the city, start at the school board or the county commission. And you start by going and attending public meetings and start paying attention to what they're doing there and what they're doing to you there. So I think that's worth it. Anyway, so I just would definitely recommend that you, that's a good place to start if you live in Washington, but even if you don't live here, if you live in a different state, that's still a good place to start. And remember, no matter what, no matter where you start, no matter what you're involved in, no matter what your focus is, if you want to make an impact on the future, you're not going to be able to do so if you're going to be hiding at home in your bunker and pretending and hoping that the world will just go the other way and not notice you. That's not going to happen. And they will eventually get around to you as well. It's better to be engaged and involved and work with other people who share your beliefs and your goals and objectives and work with ways to help other people. And I think it makes a big benefit if you do. Starting local is going to be where you have the biggest impact. If you're good and capable and effective at that level, moving up is a lot easier and more rational, and you're going to be more realistic about what you can achieve at each level of government moving forward. Not because I want to get you corrupted in the process and the system, but you got to be realistic. But that's it for today. For today's Ask Me Anything live stream. Next week will be on Tuesday. At least that's my plan right now. Let me know what you think about this video of the next Tales of Tyranny video about Bob Ferguson that should be coming out the next day or two. And with that, I hope for the rest of you who have students graduating from high school this year as well, that brave new world out there, they got a lot of challenges to face, and I hope that you've done a good job preparing your kids, but be there to support them because they're going into a world that's substantially different in a lot of ways and with new challenges than what you and I probably faced when we were in that similar situation oh so long ago. So hope all's well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to share, subscribe, and like. Sign those initiative sheets if you haven't done so yet, and if you have signed them and you have an extra sheet, take it around, get it filled up with all your other 19 friends, and get them to sign it as well and get it turned in to the Let's Go Washington folk. They're doing good work out there, and I want to have 4 initiatives to vote yes on and pay less in November. We'll talk to you next week. Hope all is well. Thanks for watching.